think we need to sort of actually just look at how complex the web of regulation is becoming. And to your point about, it's obviously this review is very much focused in the US. And as I mentioned, there's many other reviews going on in other markets, but perhaps there's not a huge amount of coordination at the moment. Now, to that point, I think what's really important to think about is actually the stance of each of the regions. So if you think about Europe, for example, we lack big tech platforms. And there's a huge focus on accessing data. Lots of regions are very focused on their position around artificial intelligence, and that requires access to huge amounts of data. So in Europe, how do they prize the data out of the hands of big tech companies that are not European? Because a lot of the data is concentrated, or personal data, with big tech platforms. So hence, I think we'll see Europe actually leading the regulatory charge to try and level the playing field. I think the US, it's probably more challenging because the more they impede the big tech platforms in the US, does that then have a knock-on effect to the US's overall position as a tech superpower? So I think there's a much more complex political situation in the backdrop.
It's such an interesting point you make about Europe leading the regulatory charge when we know that Europe lags both the U.S. and China when it comes to creating these innovative big tech players. And when we talk about the broader European market and the scope for Europe to outperform the U.S., the biggest bear point is that there are no tech titans in Europe. I mean, is there scope for Europe to catch up and take the lead as a tech giant, not just as a leader when it comes to regulation?
It's an interesting point, and there'll be different perspectives around how effective regulation can be. So as I said, Europe is clearly pushing the regulatory stance as its means to try and level the playing field. On the data privacy side, obviously it led with GDPR. Arguably that had unintended consequences of probably increasing the dominance of big tech. It has led to a swathe of GDPR-like regulations globally, but this has also led to lots of focus on data localization and some markets building in the idea of state surveillance. And obviously in Europe, that's completely unacceptable. So we will have to see how the regulatory landscape really evolves. But I think one of the key points we made in the report, and this will be important in all of these reviews that are going on, is actually around enforcement. So with GDPR, I think what's become clear is there are lots of positives that have come out of it. It's created boardroom level discussions around data privacy. It's increased consumer rights around their data, but there appears to have been a lack of enforcement. And if you look at the reason why, it's a very, very complex piece of regulation. Also, the data protection authorities in Europe have been under-resourced and underfunded, especially when you look at their position and their funding relative to huge cash piles that big tech platforms sit on. So enforcement is going to be really, really important, and that's going to be key to whether this regulation can actually make a difference.